Hey everyone, welcome. It's Anne Marie again. I am really excited to be here today. It's like perfect timing because Erin and I met serendipitously, that's the right word, not too long ago through a friend of a friend of a friend. And we missed a bunch of opportunities to talk to each other over the past few weeks because of COVID and the holidays and all the things that are happening in the world. And we organized ourselves to get together today in the midst of all the things that are going on in the Chicago public schools. So if you're here and from Chicago listening in, and you have a young person in a Chicago public school system, you are super tied in to the fact that school isn't happening in the way that it's supposed to be happening right now. And Erin Bracco is an educator and the co-founder of Buddha Kids Belly Yoga. Wait, Buddha Belly Kids Yoga. That was a lot of words for me to put together.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. And for those of you who know, I'm recovering from COVID and I have a cough drop in my mouth. So please excuse my groggy voice or my cough drop if it interferes with my speaking ability today. But Erin's an educator, a leader, an entrepreneur, and an advocate for child development, wellness, and wholeness. And she co-founded Buddha Belly Kids Yoga not too long ago to support kids in bringing mindfulness into their everyday lives. And Erin was an educator who used to do this in her classroom. And she decided to expand beyond the classroom so that she can reach more children. So I want to welcome Erin.
Thank you. It's so great to be here today.
It's really fun to be with you. And it's so good to meet you and get to know you a little bit better and the work you're doing in the world. And I just want you to start with telling those listeners who are coming in to listen to what you have to say about mindfulness and mindfulness in the classroom and how it could support young people. Why did you decide to transition from teaching in a classroom to teaching outside of the classroom?
Yeah, great question. So I taught kindergarten for 7 years in the South Berwyn School District, which is just a little bit outside of Chicago. And I definitely never would have guessed that I would be right here in this moment. But so many little things kind of, as I reflect upon my career, it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I am a kindergarten teacher at heart. I love that early childhood age group, mostly for social emotional learning. So I prefer the how can we teach people and little ones to be good humans and kind and regulate their emotions and understand it's okay to feel all of the things. So while I taught reading and writing and all of the subjects in kindergarten, my big passion is the social emotional learning part. So I found that within my classroom, it was very tricky to balance the play-based, let's talk about our feelings, all the things that we know is good for child development versus they have to be able to read by the end of the year, right? That was a really hard thing for me as a teacher to balance. And I had a wonderful school and principal and support system. And so I sort of started bringing these tools that I was using for myself as my own yoga practice into the classroom and saw so many shifts and changes and engagement in just the climate of the classroom, in my nervous system, in their nervous system. And I felt like I couldn't just leave this in this tiny little room. I was obviously making an impact with whatever 25 little humans were mine for the year, but helping to reach other teachers and other grownups that are working with kids on how this can be truly transformational. And it's not adding another thing to the plate. It's actually removing other things from the plate if we are starting here. So it was definitely a bit serendipitous for my own journey too, just with classrooms suddenly like, oh, we want this during the day. And I was like, well, I have a full-time job. So I took a giant leap of faith, but it's really because I've seen the transformation in myself and in the kids that I worked with so closely. I wanted to be able to make sure that other educators could feel empowered to perhaps go against the grain a little bit in this day and age.
Well, thank you for doing that, because I think it's a much needed element to our education. And I know you and I both know that if our kids are not available and present, they can't possibly learn. And I think it's one of the fundamental things that's wrong in our education system today. So you and I on the same page. And I used to do what you do, which is I used to go into classrooms and teach mindfulness in classrooms. And it is such deep devotional work. And I have a deep bout of gratitude for you continuing to do that work on your path, on this path.
Thank you. And thank you for being somebody that has been doing this work longer than I have, because if it wasn't for you and other educators and people that have gone into the classroom, it wouldn't be something that's a little bit more mainstream now.
Yeah, and thank goodness it's becoming more mainstream, because like you said, you can reach these 25 little humans in your classroom, but you and I both know that they actually have these skills pretty, wired in pretty easily. And the thing about it is, it's the adults in their lives that have forgotten. It's not that we didn't know, it's that we've forgotten how to tap into the resources that are there, such that we can be more mindful. So I do this all the time. I think we should start here.
Yeah.
Tell me, how do you define mindfulness for our audience? So for those of you listening in, this is a really tricky word. So I want you to listen in. And if you're doing something else, just pause for a moment and bring all of your attention here so that you can understand the distinction between what it means to be mindful and what it means to be like kind or nice.
Yeah. Well, you kind of just said it. You said stop and come right here, right?
Yeah.
So mindfulness is all about, we talk about being present. And I think that phrase is a little bit trendy. When we talk about mindfulness, it is being present, but there's a way to actually be present. It's not just, oh, come, let's just be present, right? It's the moment where you're fully aware of your internal landscape, of what's happening around you. And you're coming to that space with kindness and curiosity, right? So you notice you have a thought and you say it's a thought, and you're not judging about what the thought is, right? It's about the kind of almost like zoning out so that you can come to zone in, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah. So it's really kindness and curiosity about this present moment so that you can experience all of the things, bodily sensations, thoughts, feelings. Our minds aren't meant to not think. So it's not about being without thoughts. I sometimes think mindfulness is easier to understand with the it's not this, right? It's not a religion. It's not trying to be Zen and quiet and just look like this. Sometimes mindfulness does involve movement or a different position than the traditional, what we think mindfulness looks like.
You and I both trained at mindful schools to get our mindfulness and education certification. And I also trained with John Kabat-Zinn, and his definition is mindfulness is being here now in a non-judgmental way. And it's a really simple thing, but it took me a long time to really get that and embody what that meant, because a lot of parents, I would go into classrooms and a lot of parents would go, he needs to be nicer, or she needs to be quiet, or and there's something needed to happen. And what I was recognizing was we as adults weren't actually understanding for ourselves what it meant to be mindful, which was meeting each moment with kindness. So that means if my child is tantruming, or if there's something going on in my environment that I have resistance to, that I can actually create space for it without judging it, just sort of watching it, being like an observer of what's going on.
Yes.
And that took so long for me to really get. And it was also hard for me to get the difference between mindfulness and meditation.
Yep.
Why don't you tackle that one for our listeners?
Yeah. So in mindful schools and all of that coursework, that is a huge conversation. Meditation, you are trying to be mindful in meditation, right? That is that is a state in which you are hoping to do the meditative practice. There are lots of different types of meditative practices. Meditation also has a history that stems from contemplative practices, right? So when we talk about mindfulness, we're talking about this from a much more secular space than anything that is traditionally a religious experience or coming from some sort of contemplative practice. So I think that's one thing to note between meditation and mindfulness, for sure.
I also think mindfulness is sort of a state of being,
Mm-hmm.
whereas meditation is an actual practice where you might draw on religion or spirituality or contemplative practice, or a meditation could be a very secular experience where you're just sitting in a pose watching your breath, right? But meditation for me is a practice, like an actual experience, whereas mindfulness is a way of being.
Yeah, I really like that distinction.
Okay, so tell me this. You and I both know that these are not things that were taught in school up until recently. So how did you find yourself on your mindfulness journey? When did you find mindfulness in your life?
I would say it was when I was teaching, when I was in the kindergarten classroom. So as a educator, you wear a lot of hats, right? You're the teacher in the room. You're also serving breakfast and lunch sometimes, depending on the school you're in. You're the therapist. You're the mom and the dad. You're just lots and lots of different hats. So I have always been somebody who I care a whole lot about humans and whoever my little humans are. And so much that I like take on other people's energy or feelings or whatever it is. So I really have always needed to work on, we've been doing this at camp today, the same. Yep. I think that's a strength. I think that's a superpower. I think that makes me who I am, and I love who I am. And it can be exhausting. So I have always been an athlete, a runner, lots of different forms of keeping my body and mind healthy. I remember way back actually in high school when I went to private school, and I was actually really impressed if I think about it now. My private school, it was a Catholic school, and we had one teacher who taught theology who would always start with like a guided visualization in like as the start of all class, especially when we had a test. And I really appreciate that practice was tied into a more traditional faith-based school. But this teacher brought that in, and I remember always feeling like when we would do that, but never knew enough or thought, I guess, enough in that moment to like see like, what is this and what could I do with this? But I do go back to that when I think about my work now, like, okay, clearly those little things throughout my life have sort of been things I've stuck to in some way. So then when I was teaching kindergarten very early on, I was like, I took a yoga class, and they did, the guided meditation towards the end of the class. And I just remember being like, oh, this is what I need. I just needed space. I needed space, right? And as I developed my own yoga and mindfulness practice, I could see a difference I could feel a difference in my own nervous system and how I felt like Sunday night before school would start, or, when I knew I had a big meeting with a parent or something like that, or just a kid that was maybe a little bit more challenging or had a few more needs. I could come to that child with so much more availability and space. Yeah, so much more space. So I felt like I became a better human and teacher, and better what they needed, a better person for what they needed. Because I was working in a school that had lots of different extra needs, I would say. So definitely it was from like being in my own classroom, and like I said, I've always run kind of like I feel everybody's feelings, and how can I learn to be empathetic and all of that while also not taking it on myself.
Right. And then creating space for others to have their experiences without you taking it on is such an important skill as an educator. And as you mentioned early on in our conversation, you said you always had 25 things going on, you know, in your classroom teacher and a psychologist and a lunch lady and, you know, probably a diaper changer every now and then.
Totally.
And,
yeah.
All the things. That's not at all unlike parenting, right? Like as parents, we are, you know, wearing so many different hats, so many different times of the day. And our ability to be able to get ourselves centered in the midst of that hurricane in any given moment is really a superpower. And I don't think it's something that we honor enough, you know. And so what do you do to, well, my mind is in two different places. I'm going to share an experience I just had. So I'm back to work for the first day after a week of taking off to heal. And I've been at my desk all morning, and about a half an hour ago, I'm like racing because I'm a week behind, you know, I'm a week behind. And you and I had this conversation. I wanted to prepare for it. Excuse me. But my body is still recovering. And I'm fatigued and I'm tired and my capacity is not as great as it normally is. And so it was about 10 to 2. And I'm like, okay, I have 40 minutes before Erin and I are having our call. And I could feel my nervous system activating up and I could feel my anxiety arising. And usually what we do as adults is we get that adrenaline going and we like amp it up, push, go more. And me, I know based on my practice, and you, as you know, based on your practices, that's actually at the time to pull the plug. Right. And so I'm a 30-year meditation practitioner. I know this. So anyone who's listening in, what I want to say is just because you're well practiced doesn't mean you don't have the experiences. Your nervous system doesn't react. That's going to continue to happen. We're not ever looking for this not to happen. And when that happens, we won't have a pulse anymore. Right. So the name of the game here isn't how can I make that never happen? How can I never experience anxiety? How can I never experience overwhelm? How can I never feel the things? It's when I feel the things, what can I do to bring my nervous system back to what's the word I'm looking for, Erin? Coherence. To coherence. So what I did is I went and lay down and I put on a meditation and I laid flat, down on my little chaise lounge, and I could literally feel my heart racing. And I thought, holy cow, this has been going on and I'm not fully even paying attention. So what are the signals in your body that you can become aware of that, my nervous system is like getting like overfilled. I'm needing to pause for a moment.
Yeah. So I would say my stomach has always been one of my talking to me since I was a kid. Like I was the kid that would wake up every morning. I loved school, but I was so anxious. So my stomach would hurt. And so it was like, oh, she's hungry. Like, right. Like that was the response, which we didn't know as many things back then. But I wasn't hungry. I was just feeling some feelings. So my stomach usually will get that kind of like little butterfly type feeling. I can feel my heart beating really, really fast. And I tend to, you can sort of feel that shortness of breath, but you can also like feel your whole body like tighten up almost, if that makes sense. And I always find that when I'm like this, I have to like be like, no, Erin, go like this. Like you have to like tell yourself in your narrative, I am safe, like chill, or whatever words you use. But I can feel the body tense to then you have to say loosen up or relax or whatever it is, so that your muscles can actually go like that.
And I want to point out to anyone who's listening in or watching in that was Erin's moment of mindfulness right there.
Mm-hmm.
She's noticing that her body's getting tight or tense, or there's the pit in the belly, or
Mm-hmm.
the breath is picking up. And then she interrupts it with a new thought, a directive thought to,
Mm-hmm.
okay, take a breath and loosen. That's
Yep.
what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is like noticing, catching, and then redirecting and choosing. And that's the difference between reactivity and being
Mm-hmm. responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about the nervous system, right? And like, if we go like this, and then when we're not having those experiences, we don't have a pulse, right? That type of thing. Our bodies, our nervous system are meant to fluctuate between dysregulation and regulation. And I think that's something that people don't totally grasp, right? Like, mm-hmm. Sure, when we were a million years ago and running away from something terrible, we wanted the flight reaction, right? We wanted to be able to run away from the tiger or whatever it is that's chasing us. But oftentimes, the tiger is not actually chasing us, mm-hmm. but because our nervous system is archaic, it does the same thing if a tiger's chasing us, or if you're about to get a shot. Mm-hmm. It does the same exact thing in the body. And where mindfulness comes in is the space to be like, nope, there's not a tiger behind me, or that shot is not going to do anything other than poke me. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's okay to be dysregulated.
Totally.
If you're a human being. Mm-hmm. That is just going to happen. Yep. And the more we can get into right relationship to, oh, that's what my body does, the less resistance we bring to our dysregulation, the sooner it's going to calm itself down. And I think that is the thing that I want to just speak to any parents who are listening. And of course, there's lots of educators who I think will be listening in also. But as the adult in the room, if we don't know that being dysregulated is okay, we bring that energy to our kids.
Totally.
And then all of a sudden they're having an experience which feels very authentic because it is. And then they're being told something's wrong with them. So now they're having an experience that is dysregulating. And then they're being told on top of it, that's not okay. And so now they're going, wait a minute, like I'm bad and I'm feeling this way. And so that just amps everything up. So I think that being the adult in the room, particularly in a classroom, when you've got 25 little ones trying to navigate whatever's going on in the moment, the most fundamental thing you could do as an educator is be able to manage that so that you could be centered. Because your classroom, let's face it, we're mirroring each other all the time. So you are modeling for your students just energetically how to be. So how else do you think mindfulness can help our children find more success in the classroom and even at home?
Well, as you mentioned before, or maybe it was when we were chatting, when they're having an experience, they're not able to access anything, right? So we can't learn 2 + 2 if we are so distraught about something. We're just totally offline, right? So I think that is where it shifts for parents and for teachers, where it doesn't matter about the 2 + 2, because we'll get there eventually. If you can focus on how do you get them back online, then they can eventually get to 2 + 2. I've seen different interactions with siblings and or even peers in the classroom, right? When they're able to pause, feel what they're feeling, or even articulate what they're feeling to somebody else, right? Like, I need a minute. That's something that I've seen a lot in classrooms, and with that can translate to at home as well, right? Like, I need a minute. And so you move away and you come back when you're ready, or whatever it is. A lot of time in classrooms, and I do a lot of workshops on this, where we also talk about how you could do this at home, but having just like a little corner, sometimes it's a cozy corner or a mindfulness den or whatever fun little name you want, but it's a physical space that is not about going into timeout. It is about taking the moment to go and do what you need to do with your nervous system to come back to whatever it is that you're working on or trying to accomplish. And I do believe that our physical spaces very much affect our energy, our mood, our abilities. And so if you're tantruming over here or whatever, and you're able to physically remove yourself to a different spot, you're already shifting your energy just by physically moving somewhere else. So having some sort of like nook or corner, some sort of space in your physical home or in your classroom space has been a really awesome strategy for these experiences for kids.
Yeah, I also found that when we give kids, and by the way, and you know, we're talking a lot about little kids here, but it applies to kids of all ages. So it doesn't matter if your kids are, you know, elementary school or middle school or high school. Like, we want to start teaching these skills early and reminding kids of these tools that they already actually have. They already know how to do these things on their own. If we don't get in the way, they'll figure it out.
Right.
But the older they get, the more judgment that comes into play, the more resistance there is, the less they're likely to sort of engage in these kinds of activities. But when we start planting the seeds really early, then these behaviors just become natural. And so we want to start talking about it in preschool and elementary school and early stages. But when we give them permission, like, okay, it's okay for you to feel angry. It's okay for you to feel sad. It's okay for you to have whatever that feeling is. And we're going to give you a safe space so you can go feel that. Go and you get to choose that space, and you get to choose what it looks like. And it gives them, once again, this real sense of empowerment, because when our little ones are overcome by their emotions, by the way, even when you're not little and you're overcome by your emotions, you really feel it's a feeling of disempowerment. So if you give them just a little bite of empowerment in those disempowered moments, it already is starting to bring them back to a sense of control. And that's what we're doing when we're practicing mindfulness, is we're taking control. I don't love using that word, but
I know what you mean. Same here.
we're getting our empowerment back, you know.
Right.
So tell me, like, when parents encounter their little one or their middle school one or their high school student or their college age student navigating resistance, let's say resistance anywhere from like, I don't want to put my shoes on, you know, as the 4-year-old to my 18-year-old today, who's like, I do not want to go to school this morning. She's been home for a month now. And, you know, or I don't want to do my homework, or I don't want to fill out my college apps, or I don't want to go out with my friends, or I do what, like, whatever the thing is, right? And parents start to get activated or nervous or stressed or whatever. What is one tip, tool, strategy you have for the parent in that moment, right? What do you think that they can do to help themselves?
Well, the easiest thing to say is to breathe, but that's always the hardest thing to do, right? I feel like that's always like, okay, just breathe. But that is sometimes the hardest to do in that moment. And sometimes that's more triggering than, sometimes breath is actually triggering for somebody, right? Depending on their experiences. So I like to actually like physically find myself in space. I'm very tactile. So that's something that has helped me, is like placing the hand on the belly, because then you can then that activates the, okay, I can start to breathe a little bit here. Also, we don't think in our belly the way we think in our mind, right? So you're not going to necessarily talk to yourself down here the way you talk to yourself up here. So I like to put a hand on the heart and on the belly, or do like a hand here and a hand down here. These are called somatic holds. There's lots of different ones like that. It's like a hug. Yeah, I like to physically, even if it's just hands on my legs, depending on how I'm sitting, or pressing my feet really firmly into the ground so that I can ground myself and be like, okay, I'm in here in this space right now. And then I can do the next strategy, which might be to breathe, or might be to say, I need a minute. and then come back to whomever it is that you're working with. We also talk a lot about how teaching or talking about strategies, breath work, whatever it is, needs to be done in a regulated state first. Because if you're in a dysregulated state, it's like we mentioned, it's too hard to access things. But the more you've talked about it and done them outside of that state, it becomes a tool that's actually more accessible in that moment. So for grownups, for me at least, it's the like, find myself in space wherever it is.
Well, thank you. I think that's a really great suggestion, because I want us all to take a pause for a moment and think about the last time you got triggered or reactive by one of your kids or your spouse, or I don't care, the guy in the parking lot. Like, and what did your body initially do? It tensed up, right? Like you tense, like my hands go to fists. I can feel my like muscles tense, my feet sort of dig in. So our body is already responding. And so this way in which you are, suggesting that we like put our hand on our, belly or our heart, or give ourselves a little somatic hug, it gives our body another reset, because our body is responding. It just is. So I think that's a really great cue. I love that cue. And it feels good. It does. It immediately feels good.
Right. And in the world in which we've lived over the last couple of years, with touch being so tricky because of keeping everybody healthy and germs, it is like we are beings that crave physical touch. So that even just kind of gives you that extra little like, okay, I know it's been hard, but you can give your own self a hug. You don't have to wait for someone else.
Yeah, well, think about it. Like often we like do this with our arms like this. So we could just switch and do that. Like
a little more soft.
It's just a little softer. All right. So now parents get themselves regulated, or they get themselves calmed down. I just want to say for a moment here, you might just calm yourself 5%. You might just like, we're not in the Olympics here. We're not expecting, getting to the goal the first time out, or even the 2,500th time out. Like we are human beings. We get into reactive states all the time. So first, just know that going in and know it's never going to change. But we can do these little techniques to kind of bring the heat down a little bit, get into a more regulated state. The more regulated we become, the more access we have to all centers of intelligence. And we could start to like, okay, the door's opening a little bit. I can access what's my next move. Maybe I breathe. Maybe I take a longer break. But we can get access to those things. We've gotten ourselves now regulated as the adults somewhat. What do you suggest we do to help our dysregulated kid? And let's start by maybe age. Like maybe you can give 3 tips for 3 different age groups.
Sure. So our little ones, I would, and depending on your relationship with the child, I am a big believer in consent, right? So like you could physically help the child put their hand on their heart. I oftentimes will come around and again, depending on your relationship with the child, or even asking in that moment, can I help you put your hand on your body? And then there's your hand. So your hug coming from behind. Actually, I'm going to bring my little bear to help you with this one. So here's the child who's not feeling regulated. You can help them put their hand on their heart and their hand on their belly. And then they're actually getting a little bit of that pressure from you too, the physical sensation, and noticing, oh, do you feel your heart? How is it feeling? Oh, it's really, 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 really fast. Okay, remember, we need to take a breath to slow down those big feelings in our heart. So we like to do candle breath. It's very simple and you don't need anything other than your body. You put 2 fingers in front of you like it's your birthday. Inhale through the nose and exhale, blow out the candle. I always suggest 3 to 5 times. One more like that. Big breath in and out. And then after some breaths, we're going to go back to that hand on the heart. How's your heart feeling now? Oh,
I
it's
mean,
still
I
really
feel a
fast.
difference.
Right.
It's
So
still
maybe
really
it
fast
still feels
going.
really fast and you could do more breaths. If it's starting to slow down, then obviously their nervous system is becoming a little bit more regulated.
Yeah, and I really like this idea of asking them the question they can answer themselves and having them feel it for themselves. Something you said either before we started recording or after we started recording, I don't remember, is how you started to feel anxious or feel. And I think that we think stress, we think anxiety, but we don't actually tune in to the sensations as they're occurring in and on the body. And I really want everyone who's listening in or watching in to start to pay attention to the actual sensations in the body, because those are the markers for helping us learn more about our experiences. And it's so easy for us to deny, to ignore, to dismiss and not pay attention because we're so used to running around the planet not connected to our bodies.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, as you explore this with yourself and with your children that you're working with, each sort of emotion that you're feeling might present itself in different ways in your own body, right? Like when I'm feeling anxious, I can feel my legs sort of from my feet up, like my legs sort of starting to tingle and my feet sort of starting to tingle. And I get this sort of fainting like feeling like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to faint. Yeah. I have a few random weird medical things. So I've, since I was a kid, have had to have lots of blood work done and all sorts of things like that. So when I am not like, could never be a doctor, right? So from this reason, I'm sure I could from an intellectual standpoint, but from a like, I get really anxious around needles type of person. I can feel my body starting from the ground up. And then I do this like, oh, I don't feel so good. I don't feel so good. I don't feel so good. So I know that that's like this anxious state that I'm getting into in certain particular moments. You mentioned going like this, right? Like perhaps that's when you're like, oh, I'm so angry. Like you notice that you always clench really, really quickly. So as you explore this, you're going to start noticing that this particular emotion usually, doesn't mean it's always the case, but usually feels this way in my body. And then we're better able to identify, because when we can name the actual emotion or the feeling, then it doesn't have as much power over us.
Yeah. And, again, I want to emphasize to anyone who's listening with little kids to older kids, it's so important that we remind our kids that all of the feelings are all acceptable and all normal. And some may be more enjoyable and some may be a little less enjoyable, but that's sort of just the isness of being human.
Yeah.
And the more we can emphasize to our kids and remind our kids that being sad is, that's normal. And being happy is normal too. And we want to feel all of the sad. We want to have that whole experience of it. And I know for one, I would love to hear your experience growing up, but as a kid growing up, like my parents loved me, but if there was an uncomfortable emotion that came up, my experience as a child was, all right, like hurry up, move past that, or have a candy bar, or let's do this. Let's not have that feeling.
Yes.
And it was for no other reason than that's what they were taught. And there's no judgment over there around how I was raised. But now we're sort of learning more about social and emotional learning and social, somatic intelligence and all of the things that make us a human being that aren't just about the head, but are about actual the body and the heart. So what was your experience growing up when it came to emotions and feelings? What were you taught?
So I'm a big feeler. I've always been somebody who has big feelings. And while I have had, parents who loved me, and I definitely felt that, I I don't think they knew what to do with it necessarily. And I, you know, there was me and two other siblings. And so that's a lot of children and a lot of emotions to be dealing with. And we were all very different children. So I also sort of received that, like, maybe from one parent, it was like, let's try something else. I remember one time my brother and I got into some argument or something. We were fighting about something. And my dad's plan for us in that moment was go to the top of the stairs, hold hands, and walk down the stairs. And then by the time we were down to the bottom, we were laughing, which, yeah, like that obviously shifted the energy and the mood, but I don't know if it necessarily solved whatever feelings we were having. So not good, bad, or anything about that particular strategy, but that was like more of like, let's avoid whatever is happening. I know that my mom, she would definitely want to talk about what it was, but I, for whatever reason, at that point, maybe I didn't have the words to say what I was feeling. That probably could have been it, but I did not want to talk about it with her. So there was a little bit of space for like, maybe let's explore this, but there wasn't the vocabulary maybe on my end, or in a modeling sense of how do we go deeper into whatever it is that you're feeling. I'm like, we're a crying family. So my like instant is just to cry, like, which again, I don't think is a bad thing necessarily, but it's because you can feel all these emotions come up and that's just how it comes out. The mindfulness helps to not necessarily say don't cry, but it's just like, oh wait, like what's going on?
Yeah.
What is that feeling? How am I feeling it? And what needs to happen next?
Yeah, it's funny you say because you had two other siblings, is that right?
Yes, and I'm the middle of the three.
And I have three. My son's 23, my daughter's 20, almost 21, and then my youngest is almost just turned 7. She's 17 and a half, almost 18.
Okay.
And she's an empath, so much like you, she feels everyone's things. And for years and years, we have a pretty big family. I'm blended. My husband has 6 kids. We have lots of nieces and nephews. The house was always full of people.
Yep.
And we'd all be gathering and eating and playing games and doing whatever. And she would go up in her room and like hide. And I'd be like, get down here and interact with the family, and something's wrong with you. And it wasn't until 8th grade. So I guess she was about 13. I took her to an energy healer because she was dealing with unbearable anxiety at school, and all sorts of things were occurring at school that could be perceived as a problem. And the energy healer is like, oh yeah, she's an empath. And she has been self-regulating since she was 2 years old or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I, as the parent, was making that bad. Like something's wrong with her. She's not social enough. She's too introverted. She needs to social. I was projecting all my beliefs onto her when all along she was doing exactly what she needed to do. And it was a light bulb moment for me as a parent. And by the way, I'd been teaching mindfulness forever. So,
of course,
I was in there trying to get her to talk to me and express herself, because my 23-year-old son, he wants to talk all day long about his emotions. He wants to like talk. And my 20-year-old daughter, she's like, I'm happy to talk about them. I just want to talk about them with you. So, we have to follow the lead of our children and trust them, like trust that they actually know what they need, even if they can't articulate it. And now we celebrate her need to like, okay, this is how much capacity she has. She knows herself. I'm going to trust herself, and I'm going to be a space that she wants to come back to, and just keep doing that. So it was a huge life lesson for me as a parent, and I continue to learn. I'm like, it's a never ending process of learning.
Absolutely. And my favorite phrase kind of related to this concept is behavior is a form of communication, right?
Yeah.
Like they're telling you something, even if they're not using their words, of something that they need, right? Everything we do, say, choices, it's all based on a need that we're trying to fill. So yeah.
Love that. Behavior is a form of communication. That's so true. Well, this has been so fun. I'm really excited to tell everyone that Erin and I are going to be doing a free masterclass on January 18th, Tuesday, January 18th. Did we say noon? We said noon Central Time, I believe.
I think we did. Yeah.
It'll be, the details will be down below. But it's around that time. So we're going to have a lot more tools and strategies and tips for you as an adult, if you're a parent, if you're an educator, if you just want to know how you can use mindfulness to help you regulate and be in right relationship with yourself and your emotions, you should definitely join us for that free masterclass. And lots of other places to connect with you, Erin. And is there anything else you want to share before we sign up?
If you do have children and you're looking for some yoga and mindfulness to get started right away, we do have an app. So you have a free trial that you can take for a whole week and play around with the different breaths and stuff. So if you are looking for like a immediate, I want to do something tomorrow, feel free to check out Buddha Belly Kids Yoga. It's bbkyondemand.com. But yeah,
awesome.
We'll talk about that in the masterclass too, I'm sure.
Anywhere else, where should people look for you, find you, get more information?
My Instagram is usually our most up-to-date place. So it's at Buddha Belly Kids Yoga, or our website. We've got in-person classes and virtual options as well. And then we're very school-based. So if your school is doesn't have this program and is looking for yoga mindfulness, feel free to reach out about that.
Yeah, bringing, introducing programs like this to your child's teacher or your child's principal is a really great way to, bridge the gap between what's going on here at home and what's going on in the classroom, and supporting your school in bringing more social and emotional learning, because your kids need this. So thank you, Erin, so much for being here. I can't wait to next week to doing our workshop together and all the work we get to do together. And I am deeply, deeply grateful for all the work you do in the world and supporting young ones and the adults in their lives.
Thank you. It's been just a joy to get to know you, and I'm excited for continuing our relationship like this.
It's going to be great.